adjusted set. It's like keeping your piano tuned. It's like keeping the pads in your flutes. You wouldn't neglect those kinds of things in your other personal instruments. So pay the same kind of attention to your bells as well. All right. So my reference point for having the best sound is creating a unison chord. And I love working with those who are also in choral because they can understand the terminology. And I started out, well, I was an opera major initially, although I've always been involved in church music all my life. And I've always done a lot of choral stuff. So I transfer some of those concepts to the handbell instrument, and I'll use some of those terms. So for me, a unison chord, we'll find that out. Pick up any C, E, G, A bell that's in front of you, and I will have you ring it on the downbeat, and then I'm going to say, freeze. And I want you to do just that, is to stop where you are in the midst of your stroke. All right, so I'll give you 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Freeze. Now look up and down your row and see where don't change anything. This is just the beginning. See where your castings are in relation to your neighbor. Okay? It's kind of like this a little bit, isn't it? Part of that is going to be related to height, but another part is just paying, you can put it down now, is paying attention to where you make your initial strike of the instrument. And my personal preference, I forgot to unglue these, we can take these, is for, no matter where the register is, for the open end, the mouth of the bell, always to be pointing up. And the reason for that is, where does the sound of the bell come from? From the waist, exactly. So if the bell is tipped forward, where's the sound going? Yeah, so there's no way we're going to get a nice unison chord if bells are tipped down, and it also puts a lot of stress on the wrist, especially the low registers that you go. So maintain the strike of the bell so that the mouth, the open end, is always facing up and parallel to the ceiling. All right, that'll be easier on your wrists, on your arms, and it also gives us, in my opinion, the best sound. Now you want to be moving forward with it, not a Muhammad Ali, okay? Some ringers will have that kind of connotation. And you don't want to spill the sound out. With younger children, I'll ask them what their favorite flavor of ice cream is. And they need to imagine they're like 5 scoops, okay, on top, so that they don't tip it, as a way of reminding them to keep it forward. With adults, it's your latte or whatever your favorite libation is, and we don't have to go there. All right, so now I'm going to ask you to do the same thing. This is the last C major chord of the piece. And our congregations will see what they hear us do. And so I spend a lot of time with endings of pieces just to establish that strong positive visual. So let's do another chord. I'll have you freeze. 2, 3, 4. Freeze. Aha. Yes, good. Could you tell the difference in the sound? I mean, I could immediately. Let you follow through. And we'll do the first way with going ahead and tipping it forward and letting the sound spill. Then we'll repeat it and do it as you did at that time. Because I want to be able to sell you on the sound, and as directors, you need to be able to sell your ringers on that sound as well. So I will do it both ways with them. It's not that the other way is bad, it's just that we can be better. All right? So let's do the less favorable. And up. All right? Now let's intentionally create a unison chord together. 3, 4. Good. The other thing about unison chords is, especially when we have whole notes and half notes, is that a bell that's not moving is not making music. So it's not enough just to strike the bell and hold it in its place for the duration. We have to push the sound forward to keep the musicality going. And that is where a lot of ringers tend to have some unawareness. They get the note, they're looking down in their music, okay, where do I go next? And they're not allowing it, the visual beauty, to be there. And anytime we can give visualness to our congregations, they're going to love what's happening as a textless instrument. Alrighty, so I'm going to throw you into bits and pieces of it as well. Let's first go to 65. We're not going to start at measure 1. I never do. The chord in 65 hangs on for days. So you need to find 4 flats, B, E, A, and D. And I won't say anything at this point, but let's just ring that chord at 65. 65. 2, 3, 4. Alright, freeze while we're at it. It's looking much better. Looking much better. Alright, so what are we going to do in order for that chord to sustain into the 4th measure? Yes, keep the motion as I talked about. Absolutely. And the way to make those unison circles look their best is, in this situation, is to recircle on the downbeats of each measure. So you strike in 65, you move together in unison, and then you recircle, you don't restrike, just to keep the sound moving. All right, so let's create that visual. 2, 3, 4. And make sure that your bells are all traveling the same way. You're tipping forward just a little bit. Keep it up towards the sound. Okay, and then we get to the point of, see how long we were able to sustain that sound? Just ring it and don't do the circles. And can you hear that there's difference, that there's musicality? And I throw this question back to my ringers all the time because, again, I want to sell them on the sound because if we really are the instrument, and it takes muscle memory and physical motion to really create the best sound and create those effects. So I encourage in these kind of places, stretching and looking at your peripheral binders. Watching your music at that point really isn't going to help you, okay? But creating the beauty of the line will. All right, the next place I want to take you, where we're looking at this from a slightly different perspective, is at 81. Big, huge chords, going to 83, which again is tied until next Tuesday. All right, so it's the same pitches, 4 flats, and let's read to build it to 83. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2. Start together. Freeze. Just checking in. Just checking in. All right, and I will say that a lot until I really get a group that's with me and consistently doing unison chords. I'll just yell out, freeze, to draw attention to themselves and where that line is for visual, for unison chords. Now, how was the unison chord that time? It really wasn't very good, I'll just be honest. Let's do 83 and make it a beautiful unison chord together. And then I'm going to show you, give you some ideas of how we can sustain that.
How do you really feel?
Yeah, just at 83. Ready. And good, good. Now this is a place in the music where it's fortissimo plus. If you'll notice back up at 76, that's where you get the dynamic indication. Was that a fortissimo sound? Not even close. Alrighty. But first let's worry about sustaining the sound. And the tricky part here is we have a fortissimo dynamic that technically needs to carry for a significant amount of time. All right, let me see how long you can get that to carry. 83, and up. we just did at 65 when the overall sound is softer. But in this instance, when it is a fortissimo, I'd like to keep the level, even though there are more pitches in the chord, I'd still like to keep the dynamic level up more. So let me suggest to you this time that after we play that chord, we add a gyro to it. That will also maintain the pulse of the beats. All right, 83, and up. Can you hear how that keeps the sound a little fuller? Now there are some that don't advocate doing gyro because of the wrist action. My take on it is we're not doing gyro for 45 minutes or even 10 minutes. We're just doing it for a short period of time, and I always remind ringers not to hold the bell extra tight so that it puts that extra strain on the wrist. Keep it loose. Yes, ma'am.
Are you supposed to always do that the same speed, or are there times when you do it slower and faster?
Slower, faster. Yes, yes. Based on what's required there, and this one is probably one that I would do slower, just because of the nature and of the piece itself. Okay, so for a forte dynamic sound, and I'll be talking about this later in when we get to some more specific and advanced techniques, but where you place the bell for the sound is going to determine what your dynamic can be. And so I consider ringing from the shoulder our mezzo forte place. Ringing piano softer than that, you can still ring from the same place, but you have to have a slower circle. You can also ring into your music for a softer sound. To really get the fortissimo sound, you need to ring from a higher position, above your shoulder, and you need to use a faster follow-through of the stroke. So, hands over your head, with your bells in hand. No one's getting hurt. No one's getting hurt.
Not yet.
Not yet. Okay. Bring them down, bring them down, bring them down, and then stop right about there. Okay, you can come a little bit lower. So that you're about at your nose or your chin. Now, let's do that same chord at 83. Use a stance where you have one foot in front and one foot on back. And as you ring that chord, you're able to push that sound forward and up fast. 2, 3, 4. So you want to get the biggest amount of sound. The other thing I'll suggest to you is you can go even faster in the follow-through of your stroke. Reach for the stars. Try it one more time at 83. You have one foot in front, and you're going to play forward over that foot, and fast. Yes. That is closer, much closer to a fortissimo sound than what we did when we first started. Plus, we can see the dynamic happening. And that's the beauty of our instrument, is that we can show dynamics. And as we get further into this, we'll also be able to show melodies. And when I communicate with ringers, rather than say, that needs to be louder, I'll say, I need to see your fortissimo. Because if I just say that needs to be louder, that encourages ringers to tighten up on the bells, and then their shoulders really stiff, and they end up doing this kind of stuff to try to get a louder sound. It's also going to be a more aggressive sound because they're going to kind of put more of their arm into it. When what really needs to happen is they have a stance, the weight's on their front foot, strike from a higher position, and move faster in the follow-through of the stroke. That's less stress on the body, and it gives a beautiful visual so that the congregation can see what the dynamic is as well as experience it. All right? So I will challenge you to do more to show what the instrument does. And it also builds teamwork because you're aware of everyone ringing down the line, and they should be all aware of striking together with unison chords. All right? Does that make sense? At least that's what I propose for you as an option.
Can I ask you a question real quick?
Absolutely.
Yeah, it goes back a while ago when you were doing and having to continue to do that.
Uh-huh.
How did you know when to do that? Did I miss that, or because this last time they just did it once and then stopped?
Well, and that's a good question. I was really, this last time I was just wanting for them to get that fortissimo sound.
So we just keep going until the director cuts us off.
Yes, and in this instance, that sound is written to sustain for 4 measures. So by adding the gyro, after you've gotten that big sound, adding a gyro will help keep the dynamic level up while it's being sustained. Whereas on page 6, at 65, it's supposed to be a little bit quieter and more subdued. So that's why I suggested just repeating the circular motion on the downbeats. And again, I'm just trying to throw some ideas at you for different ways of maintaining the sound where it has a visual look.
So then it's important for the row or the tables to kind of coordinate, staying where they're not doing this kind of thing.
Yes, unless it's LV.
Okay.
Okay, and we'll get to that next. All right, but this is really the foundation upon which you build everything. And a good way of introducing this concept is on final chords, where it's not really important for, I could sing over it. It's not really important for you to be looking at your music at that point. In fact, you really should not be looking at your music, but having eye contact up, again, that communicates more positively to those who are listening to you. All right? Yes, ma'am.
I have another copy. I picked up your last session paper. Are there any more copies?
Oh, this one?
I've got one over here.
E share?
And that's last time.
Oh, well, I can spot through it.
If we still need one, you can give me your email address and I can email it to you for any of these. It's something that's, yeah, and I'll do that right away because I'm leaving again on Sunday for somewhere else. Any other questions on this before we move on? Because this is really the building block. And if it's new for your ringers, start on those closing chords and develop your unison chords on those situations. Okay, now distinguishing LV from damped sounds. Find measure 46 on page 5. And you'll need hand chimes. I ask my ringers to play note value dance sections differently from LV sections, to treat it just as a separate technique. So for LV, and I will say in general, I advocate a stance where one foot is always forward, and that will allow for us to create musical nuances. It's also healthier for your body. If you stand side by side, then you're putting the stress on your lower back as you lean over to pick up the bells to ring them. If you have one foot in front, and it doesn't matter which one, it takes the stress off of that back where you're alternating, putting the weight forward on one foot, and then you relax it and put the weight forward on the other foot. It really does make a big difference, especially when you're on concrete floors, for those of you that have that. The standing mats with foam are always good things, but utilize good posture so that you don't create extra strain for yourself. All right? And again, in my rehearsals, I'll just, until I know that all of my ringers are doing, I'll just say, check your stance. And just use short little phrases like that, so I don't have to take a lot of time to go through what I just did. I've sometimes heard this stance referred to as, think of a check mark or a Nike swish, and you'll even think of better imageries as a reminder to help folks to maintain that. Okay, so that's important for what we're about to do. LV, for me, is always played out over the table and away from the shoulder, whereas note value damping maintains its space at the shoulder, and certainly for whole notes you're going to have bigger circles, half notes, quarter notes are going to smaller circle, and eighth notes and above are going to be pretty close to your shoulder. Whereas those same note values in an LV pattern are out here. And that's where, in referencing what you have, is after you have played your note in the LV pattern, it's important to keep the bell moving so that the sound keeps pushing forward, rather than just ringing the LV note and letting it wag or stay stagnant. All right? So, just as an experiment, sometimes ringers have a hard time distinguishing between something that is LV or rung. So take the chime section in 46, which is at the fourth beat of that measure, and again, we still need B, E, A and D flats. And this is just the It Is Well tune in duet. And let's play it indicated as note value damped. So you're going to be close to the shoulder, and just turn the chime to the side to stop the sound. 1, 2, 3. Okay, all right. Now this time, bring that same pattern, LV. So you're going to have it way out in front. You're not going to stop the sound at all. Same thing at 46, 2, 3. Okay. Hopefully ringers would be able to hear the difference between those two. And if I need to demonstrate that, that's what I will do. I will use a section like that, just a couple of measures in thirds, have them play it both ways, because I want to sell the ringers on the difference between this is where you play LV, this is where you play note value down. All right? If for some reason someone is still having trouble not hearing it, I'll say, okay, Bob, come up here with me. You don't have to do that now.
Okay.
And I'll have
Follow directions.
No, I know. But I'll have Bob turn with his back to the ensemble, and I'll do the same thing, but that he won't hear me give them instructions. And sometimes when you present it from that perspective, then someone who has had trouble hearing LV versus damping, they'll be able to relate to it. All right? So that's another way that you can try to encourage your ringers to know the difference. And this is like the second foundational point. If they really aren't going to use the muscle memory to damp, note value damp when they're supposed to, and LV when they're supposed to, then it's just going to be really difficult to build dynamics, bring out melodies, and show all these other things that would be lovely to do. All right? It's like, as I put in your notes, having the pedal down on piano for LV.
Can I ask a question?
Absolutely.
That's sidebar, really.
Sure.
But while we're talking about, messing with chimes on these
Yeah.
few measures, for instance, right here, where you have chimes in the bass clef, and you're gonna have bells on the eighth notes above it.
Yes?
How do you balance that dynamic so that you still hear the chime predominantly, but those high bells tend to take over?
That's a very good point, and thank you for raising it. My preference, again, this is from my perspective that I come from, the chime stroke that I use is a lift stroke, so that when I ring chimes, the chimes are always rung so that the clapper makes minimal contact with the tube. The longer the clapper stays against the tube, the more sound that's going to be eradicated from it. But most people ring the chimes like they ring the bells. I prefer a stroke where the chimes are rung with a lift, so that we absolutely minimize the contact time with the clapper against the tube. It also keeps you from aggressively impacting the chime against the tube, and your chimes will last a lot longer because you're not forcing that clapper against the tube itself. So when hand chimes are rung, for me it's always with a lift, which means it's going to be above in this space. So there's going to be a bit more sound. It's also going to be more visual for everyone to see and enjoy. And then to address the second part of your question, when I have balance problems like that, I will first have them malleted playing into their music so that more of the sound goes into the stand, and that's if need be. And we can go ahead and take a moment to do this at 45 if you will bring up your suspended mallets. My hunch is, though, that for this kind of balance situation, getting the treble bells to ring softer as opposed to, and again, it's all about technique. For suspended mallets, you don't want to stun the bell, but you want to lift the sound from the bell. So if the mallet is like a magnet and it just whispers and you lift it out, you can be very, very gentle with that sound and it won't overbalance the chimes. But let's just go ahead and experiment a little bit with that, and I know you're sight reading, but at 45, oh, and the other thing I'll mention is when I have a line like this with upper suspended chimes, there's something that I call mallet socks. It's just something that's made up. Recycle your old gloves, snip the fingers off, oh, yeah, and wrap it around the top. And it brings that brilliance of those hard mallets in the treble down. Okay? And I just keep them in a Ziploc bag. All right, and hers look a lot prettier than mine, so she's coming with something better.
No, this is what was down here.
Oh, okay. Oh, okay. So they're
I
throwing
can't
mallets
take
in
credit for
crazy.
something I didn't do.
I do those, I call them Caspers, or Casper the Goat.
Caspers, that's good. There, that's good. So
How are
come
they
up with your
attached?
own
Is it
creative
rubber
name
Rubber band, yeah.
to create a softer sound. So that's another way to manage that. Let's do that for just a second, because I think you'll like the results. And think about ringing with the chimes, not where you ring the bells, but using a lift stroke. And again, when I see that not happening with my ringers, I'll just say, lift, and keep going. I don't stop everything. I try to keep as much of the rehearsal going, and I just have these little phrases that will pop out. All right, 45. We won't go too fast. And so LV, your weight's going to be on the front foot. You're still going to have the bells out over the table. And chimes are going to be note value damped. 3 and 4 and 1. Yeah, that's the idea. And for me, that balance is okay. But if you need to, there are other things that you can do. Tell them to play into the stands, play into the books, so the sound goes there.
Yeah, because it's not always malleted
Correct,
against it.
correct, correct.
What's a good way to damp these hand chimes?
My preference is just to turn it into the side.
Just to turn it like, okay.
But not against the clapper, but to turn it like Rick has it.
Okay.
Turn it sideways.
Yeah.
Yeah. But really, you can touch them on anything. And oftentimes, it's potentially easier for the lower chimes just to damp on the table because you're changing to other chimes, most likely in the lower register.
Okay.
All right, all good questions. So, the first foundational point then is unison chords. The second foundational point is really, honestly, distinguishing between LV and note value damping. And with those components in place, wow, the sky is the limit for us to march into the next area of skill, which will be, try not to get too far ahead of my notes, dynamics. So find measure 74. This is on page 7. Still 4 flats, B, E, A, and D. And I'm just going to ask you to sight read ringing from 74 to the downbeat of 76, just to find your way. And then I will show you how I will teach the building of dynamics. 74. Everybody got it? 2, 3, 4. 1. Was the downbeat of 76 fortissimo? Not even close. Thanks for your honesty. And I know you were sight reading too, okay, so I give you credit for that. But I will say, again, because the handbell instrument is muscle memory, I don't let that go after a sight reading time. I go back and I put the dynamics into it right away because it requires different muscle motion to create dynamics than it does just ringing the notes. And if I spend several weeks just ringing the notes and don't take the time to build in the dynamic skills, I'm never going to get those dynamics there because they've spent too much time just playing it in this old way. So, what we will do at 74 is I want you to use your voices with me. Start with a mezzo piano voice, just for the point of illustration. And we're going to count each beat and crescendo with your voice as you crescendo with the sound of your bell. So you'll start 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, and then the 76. Okay, and this is really helpful for children, by the way. You can build dynamics very quickly, and they understand what you're trying to do. But it's okay for the rest of us, too. 74, so count as you ring. Start softly with your voice, and then crescendo your voice with your bell. 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4. Absolutely, and it happened quickly. Now, take the voice out, and this time, I will remind you, it's 76, what I talked about in the last, for a moment ago, when we were getting that fortissimo chord down at 83. The weight needs to be on your front foot. Strike the chord at 76 from above your shoulder, and use a fast follow-through on that stroke, and you will get an even more powerful fortissimo sound. All right? So we're taking the voice out now, do it on your own, but physically ring that fortissimo in a different place. 74. 3, 4. 1, 2. Good. I could really see the difference, and personally, I like that kind of preparation for a fortissimo better than telling ringers, I can't hear it, play the chord loudly, because what happens when you say it that way? Ugh, there's more tension, okay? If you say, I need to see that fortissimo chord differently, then you're not communicating tension, but you're communicating where it's best to place the sound and bringing it forward. It's healthier on the body, it's easier on the body. It's a plus because the congregation can see that loud chord happening, and it's a more musical sound because you're also keeping the circular motion, that unison chord to the bell. See how I'm trying to tie all this together? All right? Good. Any questions there? And you use, yes ma'am?
You say strike it and come back fast, but when you got like 6 beats, if you come back kind of fast, then you're back. So
I know what you're saying. I know what you're saying. So move the follow through the stroke as high as is comfortable. Ring it high, and then keep it moving from that position.
okay, so you can circle more. Huh?
Absolutely, absolutely. And depending on whether it's LV or what kind of interpretation you want to communicate with that piece of music. I refer to music after the ringers have had it for a little while. Rather than measure numbers, I refer to music as the story or the scripture. I'll say, we're going to start where the resurrection happens. Or we're going to start where this particular message is important, so that they begin to internalize. So depending on what kind of interpretation and what kind of mood I want for that particular section would determine the follow-through of that fortissimo, whether it would stay forte or whether I would do something different to it, either rotating in unison, having random LV motions, or gyro. Yes?
When you say fast, you're talking about that first strike on the fortissimo.
Yes, and I'm talking about the speed of the follow-through of the stroke,
Okay.
as opposed to keeping in mind that the sound comes from the waist and the lip of the casting. And if you force that sound with more speed, you're going to be pushing that sound, and you'll get a more musical, fuller sound than when you just ring it normally. And I think to make the next step for us as ringers in musicality, if we just use the same velocity in the follow-through of our strokes, we're not really going to be able to build a dynamic sound as well as if we think about the speed of our stroke also plays an important factor. Slower for really pianissimo sounds. Mezzo forte is what I sort of established is what happens when you're not consciously thinking about it. And then faster when you need forte sounds. Okay? All right, give it a try. Okay, the next thing we want to go to is bringing out melodies. And what I've been talking about, you will see how this works for you. Let's go to Let All Things Now Living. And I realize this is sight reading over a page turn, but I'm going to ask you to start on page 7 at measure 7-0. And let's just read a little bit of this one over the bar. And you only need 3 flats this time, B, E, and A. And again, it's not fast, and we're in 3/4. 1, 2, 3. 1. And 73. And 75. 6. And 77. Okay, and that's as far enough as we need to go for me to talk about the points here. Do you see anything right off the bat that tells you where the melody is? No, that's why I picked this piece. There is no indication at all for you as a professional musician, or much less for your amateurs, to say the melody is where? You could go weeks and not even know there was a melody there. I mean, really. So as a director, if you are a director, it is your job to be the detective and find all the melodies. And I will just show you quickly where they are. The pickup 2, 71, starting with the B flat. Da-dee-dum, da-da-dee-dum. And while that E flat is sustaining, look underneath. In 72 for the B flat 4. Da-dee-da-da-da-dum. There's a canon of the melody happening under the E flat 6. And it would be so easy for that to be missed. I mean, for months, that could be missed. Because there are no voice leading lines, there's no asterisks, there's nothing there to tell you that it's there. So it's your job to find those situations. Now, we have talked about my suggestion of creating where a more forte sound happens. What do you think might be applicable to melodies?
Play a little faster on the start.
Yes. When there are melodies, you need to use the same concept stroke, at least what I do, is when you play forte. And you make sure that you're playing above your music. Anytime you have a melody, never play into your music. The strike has to be above that. It has to be a little faster in the follow-through. And the reason I say that is, if I'm in front of my group of ringers and say, I can't hear the melody, what happens? You hold the bell tighter, your shoulders get tight, and the melody that you play, rather than musical, is filled with tension because your body is tense. All right? Rather, I say, I can't see the melody. And so after we've had our little training session, and it takes a while to get this worked out, so be patient with it. Okay, can't see the melody. Does that communicate tension? Doesn't to me. But what it does communicate is that visually, I have to have the melody rung from a different place. Not from the shoulder, but maybe a little higher, and making sure that I'm above the music, and with a faster follow-through. And it's the follow-through that adds the musicality. All right? If the bell is just hanging there, the sound is not going to go anywhere. It's not going to leave. It's just going to fall off the wall of that casting. But if you put some energy behind it, it's going to move forward and it's going to be musical. okay? And what is really important is on page 8, that secondary melody that's in canon, which is B flat 4, E flat 5, G 5, and then A flat and B flat 5 and 73, and then G 4 and E flat 5. Do you see what I'm talking about in those two measures? If I can't see those melodies, then they're not going to be appreciated or heard by the congregation. And I will often say, or think to myself as a director, is the melody there because I know it's there? Or is it there because it's really there and I can see it? Okay? Because as we get to know the music, we know exactly in our head where the melody is. But we need to make sure that it's not only in our head, but it's communicated, because our congregations only get one chance to hear it. And I like to have melodies right out there on the platter. Okay? So I know this may feel like new information, something you haven't done before, but let's just try it top of page 8 at 72 before I let you go. And this was the last big thing that I wanted to cover with you, is bringing out that hidden melody, which is B flat 4 and beat 3. So the beginning of 72, the B flat 4 is a harmonic note. So it's just going to play per usual from the shoulder. But the B flat 4 on beat 3 has to go in a different space and be seen visually with a faster follow through. Make sense? Okay, give it a try. 72, 2, 3. 1, 2. That's it. Good, good. Go back and do it again. Go back and do it again. 1, 2, 3, and. Yes, good. Absolutely, absolutely. One more time. Yeah. Can you hear? I can hear the difference already. It's because I can see it, and I think you can vouch for that well. Same place one more time, and thank you. Upper bell. Same thing applies to you. 3. I'm sorry. 2, 3, and 1. The usual space, in your usual, what I'll call mezzo forte space. All right? Because I want you to be able to hear the difference and also feel the difference between what you need to do to make that melody stand out and when you don't. 72, 3, 4. Okay. Do I need to go any further? So you know how it feels differently, and you can see it, and it's all visually differently. And that's the beauty of this instrument. I mean, orchestras and bands that play, we can hear the dynamics and we can hear the melodies, but we can't actually see where it's happening. And I would like to encourage you to allow your congregations to actually see what's happening musically with your unison chords, with your LV versus note value damped, with your dynamics, and with your melodies. All right, give you some things to think about? Absolutely. You were awesome. Thank you very, very much for your time today.